The question today comes from Peter. His wife has recently shared some pretty hardcore bondage videos, and the thought of these scenarios really turns her on. When he asks her if she would like to actually try some of these things, she responds and says, no, this is just fantasy, and that this is not something that she actually wants to do. Peter then asks if it's possible that in this particular arena of BDSM, women like the look and thought of it, but not really the reality of it.
Great question. I think the thing that's interesting there is what is probably true is she would want to experience some of the things she projects she would feel if she were in that scenario. And so whether that's just as simple as him pinning her wrists above her head, or that's maybe lighter bondage than what's being depicted in reality. But bondage is usually about the experience of helplessness. And so maybe it is some version of helplessness that she wants to experience. Understanding that she may not literally want that hardcore bondage thing, but she may want some significant experience of helplessness in their sexual encounters, may explain this discrepancy, as I think he may be being a bit literal in asking the question.
One of the thoughts I had about this was the notion of paying attention to your fantasies. If a fantasy keeps cropping up and you say, well, that's just a fantasy, it may be, but it's your subconscious mind sending a signal that you should be paying attention to this fantasy. There's a reason that it keeps coming up. And if you just, well, it's just there's no such thing as just a fantasy, right? There is some message that is being communicated. So there's some content there that needs to be explicated and understood, especially when it comes to BDSM. It's some kind of deep archetypical need being expressed. And I also wondered that when she says,
very similar to the way psychoanalysts take dream interpretation. It's a very similar process. It's not literal, but it's a symbology that is being represented by the fantasy. And yes, if there's a recurrent fantasy there, there's some symbol or myth that is being represented. It's interesting. So I mentioned that bondage is usually related to helplessness. That is generally, though not always, but generally the mother archetype. So there's some interesting notions there, is that it's the notion of, it's Rapunzel, is the evil queen, contains the princess, the helpless princess in the tower. That experience of helplessness is the archetype that's being played on there.
Yeah. The other thought I had was perhaps she does not want to admit to her husband that these are fantasies that she is willing to engage in. I mean, perhaps she's not even honest with herself, that she's certainly not honest with her husband. If she's sending him hardcore bondage videos and these scenarios are really turning her on, okay, so if it's turning you on, then it's something that you really need to deeply engage with and consider, roll over in your head. And she seems to be lucky in that Peter is open to it. He's like, well, let's do it then. And she's like, no, it's just a fantasy. Sure. So it could just be that she obviously, as submissive, is not wanting to initiate either. That could be part of the holdup as well, is that what if Peter sits down with her and says, listen, I really want to tie you up. I'm also really turned on by these videos. Let's just tie you up and see what happens. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a long-term thing. They could try it out and then they realize that in real life, the fantasy doesn't actually translate over. There's some discomfort that occurs, that the execution is not what it's supposed to be, and it doesn't work out at the end.
I do want to reiterate that is within the realm of symbology, right? It's not literal. So meaning that a woman may be turned on by reading an erotic novel about rape. It doesn't mean she literally wants to be raped. It's not literal. And that's an important distinction. Somebody reading about DDLG and it's not literally wanting incest. It's the symbol that is being represented, and the same thing is true here. It's important not to frame these things as being too literal. However, within the realm of...
excellent point.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's an excellent point, a very important qualifier.
Within the realm of symbol, I would say that part of what she may be after, and I agree with you, there may be a hesitance to communicate the reality with her husband. Maybe she's very kinky and she perceives him as not being dominant. And so this is the other issue that people can run into. She may be very kinky, but she may not see in him the makings of a dominant, or she may not respect him or his masculinity in that frame. And so the harsh truth may also be, yes, I want these things done to me, but not by you. And that may be another possibility of why he's getting the answer he's getting is, I don't believe you as a dominant.
That did not even occur to me. That's an entirely plausible explanation as well. If he truly was carrying himself around with dominant energy, she might be more willing to trust him and say, you know what, I do have these fantasies and maybe I'm slightly ashamed, but she trusts him enough to be able to confide that in him.
I think she trusts him. I think that she doesn't necessarily have that degree of respect for him, that she doesn't inherently believe in him as a dominant, that if he said, get on your knees and suck my cock, or I'm going to tie you up tonight, she would say, yes, daddy, that's what's going to happen. I don't think she fully is bought in for him. And I think that's seen a bit in the framing of the question, even the language he uses. Could this be? I'm asking some strangers on the internet, could that be it's a bit of hesitancy. It's not a level, straight conversation with his wife is, hey, this is kind of hot. Obviously, this turns you on. Let's do it. Start slow. And I have a plan. I'm not going to jump off the deep end. That would be absurd and scary. I've read up on it. I've studied it. And now let's start with me just pinning your hands behind your back as I kiss you. Not even having sex. Just that. We're going to start here and we're going to move up. And I have a plan for how we're going to do that. Well, he's not doing that. He's asking strangers on the internet what this means. And I think there's a reason she doesn't quite believe him. This is a possible interpretation. I'm not saying this is definitely what's happening, but it's plausible for that reason. The other thing that comes to mind is she wants to believe. So she may not believe yet, but she wants to, or she wouldn't keep sending it to him. She would keep it to herself. She's trying to provoke. I think that's the other possibility, is that she's trying to provoke dominance out of him by sending these videos. Hey, maybe what she's looking for is for him to not ask her, but to do it. And that is in itself a bit unhealthy and comes from her not fully owning her shadow. I think it's natural to have that impulse at first, but it's not viable. It's too dangerous. There's no way to do this without having a conversation and owning up, yes, this is what I want. How do we make this happen? I think she's trying to provoke action in a way that may end up being a little bit unsafe. However, there are ways to navigate even that. It doesn't have to start with a conversation. It could start with very mild actions, with him taking the initiative to create a plan. And then rather than just asking, is this something you want to do, to ask the question differently, to say, hey, I want to enact this plan. I want to hold pin your wrist down. And then I want to try tying you up a little bit and see how that goes. I want it for me, not because you sent me these videos and I'm trying to please you, which is not a dominant frame and breaks the fantasy for her. But if he says, hey, I want to be safe. I never want to break your trust, but I think it'd be really hot. I want to do this. She may absolutely then be getting her fantasy fulfilled because he's stepping up into the role of that dominance. And she would genuinely then feel a bit helpless because he's doing it for himself, not to please her, which means she's not in control. If she's looking to feel helpless and he's only doing whatever she wants, how helpless is she really? The example I give is she wants to give you a Ferrari, but you keep telling her you're not going to go over 15 miles an hour. Well, then I don't want to give you a Ferrari. Like, you're not going to use it properly.